Now, a warning before we get started that today's discussion may contain reference to sexual assault and or violence, which may be triggering to survivors. Now, if this raises any concerns for you or someone that you know, you can seek help from 1800-RESPECT on 1800-737-732. Now, let me give you that number again. It's 1800-737-732. Firstly, I'd like to welcome our breakfast host, Senator for South Australia, the Honourable Penny Wong. Penny is the Leader of the Opposition in the Senate and Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs. She is an inspirational leader and role model for young Australian women and the migrant community in South Australia. We know that Penny always advocates for women and women's issues in the community, and we thank her for her continued support of the IWD breakfast. This year is her 20th year as host. Now, Penny will be joined today by the formidable Grace Tame. Grace Tame is an outspoken advocate for survivors of sexual assault, particularly those who are abused in institutional settings. From the age of 15, Grace was groomed and raped by her 58-year-old maths teacher, who was found guilty and jailed for his crimes. However, under Tasmania's sexual assault victim gag laws, Grace couldn't legally speak out about her experience, despite the perpetrator and the media being free to do so. Grace has demonstrated extraordinary courage, using her voice as a platform to push for legal reform and to raise public awareness about the impacts of sexual violence. She's a regular guest speaker for high-profile events and television programs and uses her media profile to advocate for other vulnerable groups in the community. In 2021, Grace was recognised as the Australian of the Year, the Australian Financial Review's most culturally powerful person, and one of Time magazine's next generation leaders. Please join me in welcoming Penny and Grace.
Great to have you here, Grace.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, Penny.
Welcome to Adelaide.
Oh,
thank you so much for joining us on this 30th anniversary, our 30th breakfast for International Women's Day. We're really pleased to have you.
Oh, well, thank you. It's an absolute honour to be here, and
And you enjoyed seeing the photos of me when I was young and had no grey hair.
Yeah, and it's
She actually laughed.
No, I was actually also thinking, as I was trying to coordinate all my own hair, that maybe I should just get it all chopped off. Because with this microphone on, it's not. It's probably not the best thing. But anyway,
it's fine. Well, look, I want to start by just saying, apart from thanking you for being here, thank you for your courage and your voice and advocacy in this country over this last year. And I wanted to start with, what an extraordinary year you've had. 2021 was a really big year for you, and I wondered if you could share with us what it's been like.
Oh, well, thank you very much for those kind words. Clearly don't watch 60 Minutes, do you, Penny? Yeah, look, I stand on the shoulders of giants, though, and I have to acknowledge that. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the work of people like Nina Fennell and other activists and experts in the sector, other survivors who have paved the way. People have been yelling into the void for a really long, long time. And I think also in this space, we have to acknowledge that it's often the work of, First Nations people, and diverse voices who have a lot more struggles, who are facing far greater barriers to justice, and who often don't even get justice, who then, whose experiences are erased, and we benefit from those, and we don't actually get to acknowledge those. And so I draw a lot of strength and courage from people like that. And it's one thing to have a message. It's another thing for it to be received. So, I I feel very humbled and grateful that I was able to walk out onto that stage on the 25th of January, and it was the right time. You know, it was the right combination of experiences, I suppose. You know, it was the right moment in history, and it was catalytic. But I guess there were catalysts before me that enabled that to happen, and it was a wild year. To say that my fiance Max and I were thrown in the deep end on the 25th of January would be a colossal understatement. You know. I think what a lot of people don't understand is if we wind back the clock to that moment, I was actually, unemployed. We were two 26-year-olds living in a share house in a housing commission area. I had no media training. Still don't have any media training. Maybe I need some.
I think you're doing fine.
Well, I mean, it's about being authentic, and part of that authenticity is making mistakes and taking people on that journey with you, through the mistakes and owning them along the way, because that's part of leadership is the imperfections, and the discovery. Yes, it's certainly been a steep learning curve. It's not even just one learning curve. It's like all these simultaneous intersecting learning curves. Certainly, because I being a survivor of child sexual abuse has all of these different complications, and I think that a lot of people don't understand that. It has a domino effect of traumas that, like in my case, for example, meant that I didn't have the opportunity to safely go and complete a university education. So unlike a lot of people who work in this space, a lot of fellow activists, I don't have a knowledge of feminist history. I don't have, I'm not as across all the terminology as I could be. And I try and I do my best, and it's a really difficult space to work in, and I try as hard as I can be to be conscious of needing to include, diverse voices and platform diverse voices. But yeah, it's really difficult, and like we've made a lot of mistakes, my partner and I, along the way, but. Yeah.
So can I ask you, it's obviously been a massive set of learning curves.
Yes.
Learning curves and
magnified learning curves as well. There's an aspect as well to explore.
Yeah, and some of it, pretty confronting and challenging for you. How have you sustained yourself?
Well, keeping in touch, not losing touch with meaningful values, staying grounded. Max and I are very real, down-to-earth people. We are very family-oriented. We also love nature. We love the water, and we love to exercise, and we love to exercise in nature, and we stay very present as much as we can be in that way. That really helps. It's just so those simple things. It is hard to do though, and it's really easy, especially working in this space, which is very traumatizing and can take you out of the present moment a lot. A lot of the time we're engaging with survivors, or I'm referencing my own story, which pulls us back into the past. 365 days, I was pretty much living in the past, and there's a lot of disassociation that comes with trauma, which is both, like a trauma response, but it's also a protective mechanism, like to just completely pull yourself out of. And there's a lot of stuff that I learned about myself as well as somebody who is an adult who was only recently diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And being under intense public scrutiny, and also being in this high pressure social situations. There's just all these moving parts that are all so complex and nuanced, and dealing with all of those things. And there's no guidebook out there to deal with this very unique combination of circumstances.
It does take a lot of courage, I think.
Yeah, and I've been very supported though, as I said, very lucky. And as difficult as it is a great privilege to be in this position to be heard, because it is a privilege afforded to very few. Like I said, a lot of Australians, whether they are, our First Nations Australians, people with disability, women of colour, people of colour in general, other marginalised groups face even greater barriers to justice, and we have to acknowledge that.
And tell us about what's next. So you've got your foundation, Grace Tame Foundation, and you're advocating for legal reform,
yes,
also education and prevention.
Yes.
So tell us a bit about some of the things you want to try and use, the platform you have and the networks you have to advocate for over the next couple of years.
Yeah, so Max and I established the foundation really as a framework for our ongoing advocacy goals. We were already pursuing structural change. We just really wanted to sort of put it all in the one place. We had a pretty clear idea of what we wanted to achieve. And we carved out a specific niche. I, for one, saw a lot of problems in our language. Because language influences our perception. And perpetrators of child sexual abuse are very calculating, sophisticated criminals. And they don't just manipulate their child victims, they manipulate all of society through their sophisticated language and their charm. And one such example that still exists nationwide for the most part, well, it's still in 6 jurisdictions currently, is the wording of the charge maintaining a sexual relationship with a person under the age of 17, which is used to describe what is actually persistent child sexual abuse. Now, that wording, maintaining a sexual relationship, can be weaponized by perpetrators who are convicted of that crime to romanticize what they've done. Both, in the media and in their own continuation of the narrative after they've committed the crime. And that is something that I personally experienced and I've seen perpetuated. And it is what feeds into our victim-blaming culture. And I think that's a really good place to start. So we've established is a campaign. We've called it Stop Gaslighting Survivors, and it's to change the wording of that offence to the persistent sexual abuse of a child. So it's to remove the word relationship from every jurisdiction.
With all of its connotations.
Yeah, with all of its connotations, from not only the offence name, but also the legislation body in every jurisdiction in Australia.
So can I pick up something you spoke about there, which is something you've spoken about before, which is narrative and the power of narrative. And one of the things I always say when I'm asked by women, particularly younger women, give me some advice about career advice or whatever, and I always say the best piece of advice I ever got from someone was find your own voice. And I've been struck in some of your public statements by the way you describe perpetrators using and deploying narrative as an instrument of control.
Yeah.
And I think one of the most extraordinary things about what you have done is you have confronted that and you've triumphed over it. And you've done that by telling your own story with clarity and with courage. So I guess my question is, how did you do that? How did you come to a point where you could do that?
Oh, look, truth, I don't even know. truth just is. And, I mean, I would have to take myself back to my 15-year-old self and the experience of this perpetrator who abused me. How he undid himself ultimately was his sheer arrogance. I mean, among other things, he was your textbook, psychopath, totally devoid of empathy. But, he ended up boasting to me about one of the other girls that he abused. That was one of several. It came to light, and they ended up finding a trophy file of other girls that he had collected over his tenure. He was at the school from 1992 until I reported him to police in 2011, and he kept them all. Like, he was a very sick man. But, so obviously I experienced his truth, but, when I would sort of, confront him, not in an aggressive way, I remember him just sort of, I remember the blatant lies, I remember the blatant lies. And it's such a difficult question to respond to you, Penny, because I just don't know it any other way, in that it's so innate in me that, to be true to oneself, like that authenticity is just such, like, I can't help it. It's a reflex. I mean, you saw it in me when I stood next to Scott Morrison. I wouldn't have been just letting myself down that day if I smiled at him, at a person who has let so many people down, not just women, in the context of sexual assault, like, I'm talking about the country, like, I would have been letting so many people down.
So I
can't help that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a reflex of truth, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's a reflex of truth. That's right. And so in the end, that's what it was. And I got to a point where my fear of this man, I would hear the blatant lies, and I was seeing the truth, hearing the lies, feeling the pain, and ultimately, even as terrified as I was, and I'm a petite person, and he was raping me, and he would lock me in his office, or he would lock me in a cupboard. He was an awful man. He was an awful man. But I remember I got so angry. I remember before I reported him to police, I remember I just could not. I could not hold back. And I remember telling him I thought he was a monster. I remember I told him I thought he was a monster and I hoped he died. And I reported him to police 4 days later. I told him that. I could not help that. And that has been with me every day. So when I know he knows that. He knows exactly what I think of him. And he still attacks me online. He uses handles, Instagram handles or Twitter handles that have references to grooming material that he used in the offending 12 years ago, so that only I know that it's him. Just to mess with my head. But he knows exactly what I think of him. Because I told him. And not a lot of people actually did do that.
well, and it's, as I said, extraordinarily courageous, not just for you, but and not only for the society which has to listen, and that's been a good thing.
Yeah.
But I think also of other survivors, because what you did, so many have not been able to do.
Well, it's about, and it plays into it's all connected to and I hate to keep bringing it up, the smiling or frowning photo with Scott, but it's all connected because it's about what it is. It's about a culture, a very toxic culture that has enabled abuse to continue for so long, and because this, if we bring it back to this pedophile, he wasn't able to thrive in this environment, in this school, just because of his own evil, and him being really good at concealing it. He was able to thrive in that environment because he groomed all these other people, and all these other people smiled along and played along, and no one wanted to upset the apple cart. And I could have been one of those people too. I could have just not told anyone and been a part of that pretty picture that was, bubbling underneath the surface and just, patching things up. But that's where we've gone wrong, is we've got this disproportionate concern with and making things look like they're okay.
I was going to ask about the focus on your demeanour at the lodge, and it seemed to me the question I was going to ask, and you've answered it to some extent, was the focus on that and the debate around that, the use of your old social media photos,
it's disproportionate,
correct, and what you cop online, so as three examples of how you've been dealt with. What do you think that says about our society?
Yeah, well, it's sad because it's the saddest part about all of that. Our society's disproportionate, like our disproportionately warped perspective is that it's the perpetrators who benefit from it. Because our focus is off them. And it's on the people who make the little errors, often as a result of what they've done. You see?
If it is an error.
If it is an error at all.
If it is an error at all.
That's right. Exactly right.
Yeah. One of the things you've called for, it was an extraordinary turn of phrase, I think, is a nationwide shattering of shame.
That's right.
Can you tell us what you mean?
Well, not just a shattering of shame, but perhaps a redirection of it. And it's sort of a good segue to what we were talking about before. Why is it that we're shaming, or for so long we're shaming the people, or making people feel bad or uncomfortable for bringing up their stories of abuse? Oh, it's too heavy, I don't want to talk about it. The shame sits at the feet of perpetrators of these crimes. That's where the shame belongs. There's no shame in being a survivor of whether it's child sexual abuse, sexual assault, domestic violence, whatever the trauma is, whatever experience is. Life is an inherently traumatic thing, it's all relative, there's no shame in that. We need to make space for each other, and sit with each other's pain, even if, sometimes hearing that pain causes us to,
it's not a comfortable process.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Feel, and that's what it is. Is a lot of the time it makes us feel uncomfortable. It makes us sometimes question, Have we done something maybe, or, makes us remember something that we went through? Maybe that's where it comes from. But, yeah, the real shame is in, the perpetrated behaviour that we need to call out and draw attention to. That's where we need to focus that energy on.
So that clarity and that courage that we've spoken about, I mean, you've inspired a lot of women, but obviously...
those people in turn inspire me.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk to you. I mean, obviously what we've seen is, Brittany Higgins, who's used her voice so courageously. We've seen you two standing together. We've got other extraordinary young women, Chanel Contos and others. I'm interested, what is it like having these younger women working together or by your side or speaking about some of the issues that you care about? How is it to work together?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think that's I think there's there's obviously there's room for more. There's problems, and especially there's been light that's been shone on it in recent days. That there's not enough diversity currently, I think, in the space, but there's room to share the platform, and I don't think certainly it's never been my understanding that there's only room for a certain number of people, but as I understand leadership is not about having power over, it's about empowering others, and there's nothing more empowering than empowering others. And I see leadership as about, walking on a plane, sort of holding hands side by side, and not being like a hierarchical thing. I find that very disturbing and sort of.
Well, I mean, I think International Women's Day is a day where we think about that, and we think about where we've come from, what we're doing now, where we want to go, and every year on around International Women's Day, I always do think about the women who've gone before, and how much we owe them, but also how much we still, frankly, owe the next generation, and how much more there is to do. I was interested. I was interested in reading one of your interviews, and you talked about the word feminist not being something you use, and I'm interested in you speaking about that.
Oh yeah, there's a few reasons for that. One is that little known fact about me. So my mother is the youngest of 5 girls, and when she was born, we were talking about this off stage. When she was born, the eldest was actually still 5 years old. Very
5
close.
under 5.
Yeah, 5 under 5, and she was raised for the most part by just her their mother, my nan, Patricia, Nanny Pat we call her, and her mother, Nanny Beulah, who I never got to meet, unfortunately. She died just before I was born. But then the 5 sisters between them, there are 11 of us cousins and 8 of us girls. And at one point, all of us grew up on the one street. And we're like all of us 11 cousins. And we just got together a couple of weekends ago for my cousin's wedding. I was in the bridal party. And we're like brothers and sisters. We're really close. But we're just a family of strong women. And I grew up just never questioning a woman's worth, and we grew up with diversity as well. My mum's cousin, my mum's 2 cousins, Karen and Kent, who later became Kelly in the 80s, and was sadly tragically died. But it was never, diversity to us was normal. Mm-hmm. It's very normal. And Karen she's gay. She lives in Canberra. She was at the press club with her partner, Helen. But, you know, like, all of that to me was just totally normal, and I never thought about it. And also, like you and I were talking about before, yes, I went to a private girls' high school, but because of the flow-on effects of trauma, I didn't go to university, and I didn't study. I didn't do gender studies or anything like that, and my knowledge of feminist history isn't as in depth as it could be, and so it's not that I'm not a feminist. It's just that it's not a conscious thing for me to identify. And I also have my foot in a couple of camps. You know, like my dad came from a working class background, and my grandmother on that side, you know, she was a salt of the earth person, but that wasn't the language she used, you know what I mean? And my grandfather the same, like that. My pop, you know, nan and pop, like that wasn't the language they used, you know. And there's a certain level of, I wouldn't say elitism, you know what I mean? But there is like inherent in that word maybe that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I think I was going to say two things to you. One is, as I said to you also off stage, as we share, we both have mothers who were from a family of 5 girls. So, you know, there you go. That's why we're both troublemakers, probably. I think that the second thing was you see, I would look at how you operate in the world, and I would, for me, you are a feminist. I'm not trying to label you, but you know,
but again, it's innate.
Yeah, I think what I would share with you is, I don't call myself a feminist because it's the correct thing to do. I do it for 2 reasons. One is it associates me with a set of political beliefs and traditions which are important to me. But the second is, for me, it's also an act of respect. It's about recognising, and you actually said something similar, it's in a slightly different context. To start with, that you stand on the shoulders of giants. For me, it's a way of associating myself with, you know, so many women over so many generations who've done so much to enable me to have the opportunities I have. So I suppose that's how I think about it. I don't think about it as an elite sort of university degree type thing.
Oh yeah, no, I don't mean that. I think when I say that I just mean.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot, Grace.
No. I think that article, to give you a little bit of context, that article was this happens a lot in the media where you.
No kidding.
You do things where I actually did a typed article, and then there was a separate article, and there was confusion over what was going to be used, and that was a conversation that was jammed up. And I was talking about how in some, like when you're talking to some people, you use different language.
Absolutely.
And like if I was talking to my nan, for example.
You talk about it differently. You talk about it different, and you also spoke really movingly.
It's not that I don't call myself.
Yeah, but you also spoke really movingly about the importance of speaking for all survivors, including men who are survivors of abuse and violence. I thought,
it's really, and like, you know, and gender diverse people, you know, like it's and you know, because. And it's so hard, but also like I can't speak for those people. That's not my intention either. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm an advocate of the child sexual abuse survivor community. I can't speak for those people, and that's part of the problem, though, too, is that like often the media have a responsibility. Yeah. The media put me in a position where they go, Grace Tame, advocate for child sexual abuse survivors. And like dump this huge burden on me and go, there you go, that's you, do all the work. And I've never once claimed to be the answer, the solution. You know, these complex, nuanced issues accordingly require a suite of ongoing collaborative solutions.
Yep, agreed.
From a diverse range
Agreed.
of voices.
So let's talk about that.
Yay!
So, when I hear the really upsetting statistic of 1 in 5 women being a survivor of assault or violence, sexual violence.
Yeah, well, it's 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys, but yeah.
And I think, we've been talking about that and advocating that for action on that for decades.
Oh, I know.
And we have a moment, right, where there is, I think, a greater momentum than we've seen probably than I can recall in my political life. So I guess my question to you is, if former Senator Grace Tame in 20 years' time is sitting here...
Former Senator. Yeah, you
or Senator...
Good luck getting me into politics.
I'm being flippant.
Me inside Parliament. Try to keep me down. Good luck.
You don't have to. You don't have to be kept down. But like 20 years' time, if we're and someone else is here, how do we make sure that they're not talking about the same stats still?
I think that our best, it's prevention for me, and education is our primary means of prevention, and it starts with, teaching kids. It starts with knowledge is power, first of all, and it's not just about teaching kids what to look out for in terms of the negative behaviours, because that was one of the things for me that I found really confronting. Was I felt really affronted when I learnt what grooming was as a 22-year-old 7 years after the fact, going like, why the F didn't someone...
Might have been helpful if you'd let me know this before.
Yeah, and especially when I was giving my statement to police too, I thought back to the time when I was sitting there in the police station, like the police would have known that I was groomed and they could have helped me explain like this, oh yeah, you were isolated. Oh yeah, and then he broke down your boundaries, and oh yeah, that book and that movie with the really old man and the young girl, like he's priming you. Oh yeah, that's textbook. Yeah, it's all, they write about it. But nobody told me that. And I had to find it through some backdoor way and teach myself about it. That's not okay. When someone gets stabbed, we most of us have the vocab to go, I was stabbed here and it hurt me this way, and here is how I get help for it. It's pretty basic stuff. We need to have that taught in schools, obviously in a way that is appropriate for certain age groups. We can't be teaching 4-year-olds about the complex layers of, isolation and, maintaining control and all those sorts of things. But, people who design education frameworks know how to do these things, and we can, find the resources to do that. But then there's also the positive side of things where we can teach kids about respectful relationships and, protective behaviours. And then the consent piece is actually something that comes along, later. There has been a lot of focus on consent, which is great, but also you can start with respectful behaviours.
Correct.
First, before you get to consent. Maybe if you just model healthy relationships, then that would be great. I was in Perth. I witnessed the cutest thing. Max and I were at a Mercy Care talk, and there was a little 4-year-old and an adult who were demonstrating what a 4-year-old had learnt through a protective behaviours course. Now, boundaries was something, for example, when I went through school, I didn't learn about what boundaries were in the context of knowing your rights as a child and knowing your body parts and knowing what was appropriate and having the agency to say no to an adult. I didn't know what boundaries were except in the context of tug of war. And I saw this little kid get up on stage, and the adult doing the demonstration said, "Can I give you a hug?" And the little 4-year-old goes, no. And I've gone, that's amazing.
Wow.
That's such a simple concept. And yet that child has so much agency that as a 4-year-old, I never thought I could have, because it was conditioned in me from such a young age that if I said no to an adult, that I would be letting them down. And that cumulative conditioning
Contributes.
yeah, it wasn't the reason why I was groomed, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's those little things where we can equip kids with the tools, some of the tools, and power, respectful relationships, protective behaviours, and then knowing what insidious grooming and things look like, what to look out for. And when people say, oh, that's too dark or whatever, I'm sorry, but I'm going to be real. I would rather my child know what grooming looks like than have them go through it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's coming from someone who went through it. It's taken from me.
Grace Tone, thank you.